identity, are those things parallel passion, or are those actually tied into your Holochain thing? It seemed very separate.
No, those are very much tied in. So part of what drove our architecture is that we have a complex adaptive systems model of identity. So Joe showed up at Rebooting Web of Trust saying, hey, I'm interested in doing this identity mental models thing. I said, I've got 3: security, liberty, data. Is there any others? And I said, I think there's another one, because I don't see me, what we work on, anywhere in there. I recognize all those models, but I think there's another one, and it's identity as a complex adaptive system. And the role that identity plays in helping individuals in some set of relationships make decisions, help them steer and navigate, and the way in which they acquire information and make decisions about what they're going to do, and the ways in which they control their distribution of information to help minimize risks or open up opportunities. But it's a fluid thing, and it's not just fluid at the relying party, and it's also fluid on the who am I? And part of that has to do with us having a perspective of, hey, this thing seems like this card seems like it's separate from the world around it. And I can pick it up and the table doesn't come with it. Okay?
May I have one?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
But it actually is also in relation to the world around it, right? There's chemical interactions, there's flows of temperature, etc. And so, yes, at one level it is separate. At another level it's connected. And this is like an age-old thing. But an observer will go, well, for my purposes, I'm going to treat it as if it's a static thing. It doesn't change over time. And that's a useful shortcut. But it is a shortcut, right? And we think that when you look at how complex adaptive systems actually work, the things that manage to persist have useful shortcuts. They don't actually observe the world as it is in all of its complexity. They have shorthand ways of going, okay, I think I get what's going on here. Oh, that's food. Boom, right? And the other organisms that do a much better job of sensing everything that's going on, they tend to die out. Because in order to eat the food, they're actually spending much more energy doing processing that doesn't help them, information processing.
So can I ask you a really quick chicken and egg question?
Yeah.
Did your sensibility about identity and all of that, do you scaffold on top of that with the Holochain thing, or did the Holochain thing insist on further understanding of this other stuff more so, or was it equivalent?
It was an iterative process. So for me personally, I was a political theorist. So I was a political philosopher,
Right on.
and had been looking for how can you make communities regulate themselves better, right? And particularly at global scale. And looked at a bunch of different things and wasn't able to find something that seemed satisfying until I realized, oh wow, humans use some very different mechanisms. For some of the other folks on this project, they actually went and built tools, right? They went and built currency systems, and they tried to figure out how to build interoperable currency systems. And eventually they realized, oh, we've got the model wrong, right? And they had to go back. So a lot of what we've done is we've gone and taken a look at natural systems, living systems in particular, and gone, okay, how are they steering themselves? What are the mechanisms? And we tried to unpack what we thought was happening there, and then use that as a design framework to figure out how we should actually build information systems to help human societies steer themselves.
Very cool.
Okay. It is. So I'll put a few things here. So stuff to talk about maybe later on, right? So extras. Holochain is one. Self-sovereign identity, like implications of this stuff for self-sovereign identity. Another one is impacts on Einstein's theory of relativity.
Woo! Just felt gravity change.
Yeah.
That could plus something. And we're working on a project called Gravity.
Yeah, their system is called gravity. So fluid boundaries of self, and I'm not actually I have a paper that I haven't published that was just a little draft, and I'm kind of going to be working from this. The reason I haven't published it is because I've been distracted, and I don't think the examples that I use are coherent enough yet. They kind of jump around a bunch, so they shift context, which can be distracting. Some of the folks pointed out, but that's basically it. So. The other thing, currently I've called this, I haven't called it fluid balance itself, this is called How Consciousness Emerges and Persists, which is purposefully,
Specifically, complexly vague.
well, no, purposefully provocative, right?
Right.
But well, in the there's a bunch of folks who will write you off right away because you're trying to talk about consciousness. People in the physics community go, screw them, they won't even hear it.
Unless they belong to foundations of mind.org.
Fair enough.
Seriously.
Fair enough. Okay, so I'm not gonna try to read this thing, but I will use it as like, okay, what am I supposed to say next? So what I said, you have two. Let's just for a simple model, you've got two entities, and I did give some kind of definition of entities here. It's in a footnote. I said the definition of an entity gets complicated quickly, but suffice to say that if one or more processes form a coherent functioning that operates in a manner that is different from how the surrounding environment operates, we can conceive of that as an entity for our purposes here, right? So the card, hey, this card feels separate from the table. Let's treat it as an entity. So with that sort of speed bump passed, so we got two entities. Okay? If they interact in some way, you get a change. The interaction results in a change in the one. So if this thing emits light, right, and the light hits this, it heats up a little bit, or right, there's some information always has form. It is in form, convenient, use of the words here, in form, and that information, when it lands, leads to a transformation. The way that we notice that something happened was that we actually alter in some way. The sound wave hits my eardrum, resulting in a little fluctuation, and that leads to some chemical stuff and some electrical stuff, and my brain actually changes shape, right? But just the fluctuation was, that by itself counted as a change that was noticeable. So we take two or more entities. I'm going to do the example that I've used in the past, which is an H2 molecule, another H2 molecule, an O2 molecule, right? When these things are moving along and they hit a flame, they all light on fire. If we have them do a different dance, they come together, now we've got two H2O molecules, and two water molecules. They hit that same flame, they may extinguish it. What happens is, anytime you have an interaction between two things, it leads to a communication. Right? There's this transformation of entities happening back and forth. And because there is communication, there's now community. There's essentially a we. There's a new form that exists there. And that form may interact with the surrounding environment in some different ways than how each of those participants by themselves would have interacted with the surrounding environment. So they become sensitive to the outside world in different ways, and the outside world may become sensitive to them in different ways. You still have, the H atoms. They're just doing a different dance, and so their relationship with other stuff is now altered. One way that, the reason I call this How Consciousness Emerges and Persists, is that you can think of this as a new layer of sensitivity, right? You have new sensing capabilities available or lost. And so at that layer, there is some sort of consciousness, some awareness, or some ability to interact with the world that maybe didn't exist at this level. It doesn't mean it's higher, it just means it's different. I'm going to touch here. So I'll just actually read through some of the, without doing the examples, I'll read through some of the highline titles. So take any two or more entities. Any interaction with them can be thought of as communication. With any communication, there is the creation of a community. there are certain signals that the community will be sensitive to. Some of these are different from what the interacting parties are sensitive to when not in community with the others. On the other hand, certain other systems may only be sensitive to them, open or capable of interacting with them, when they are functioning as a group. The set of entities and processes that the group is sensitive to and capable of interacting with will determine what it is conscious of, and thus will determine the characteristics of its consciousness, i.e. the perspective from which the combined entity interacts with the world. It is in this way that a new consciousness emerges. However, it is important to note that though this new layer of consciousness will interact with other entities and will likely alter even those entities that participate in its generation, it does not subsume them. They may continue to persist. This is easier to understand when we recognize that this consciousness, like all consciousnesses, is not an object, but a set of processes. The key consequence of this is the recognition that consciousness does not exist solely at a single layer. It is pervasive throughout all layers and their interactions, and these interactions overlap with one another. And so at one level, what this means is every interaction you have changes you. That when I have a conversation with Judith and she introduces me to some new technology around identity, it alters what I am conscious of out in the world, and it may shift the way that I interact with others in the future. Now, her and I doing a particular dance, having a particular conversation, is a larger thing that may be sensitive to the world in particular in unique ways. And it may alter each of us individually. So there's sort of that layer. Another version of this is that I am currently sensitive to certain signals: sound, light, touch, smell, taste, right? I've got some sensing capabilities here. And there's other sensing capabilities that I lack. Like I'm not really good at detecting sonar. And I'm not really good at paying attention to radio waves. My body doesn't have those sensing faculties. But you hook up a radio which is able to pay attention to radio waves and is able to transform that signal into something that produces sound waves. And suddenly we have a transformation occurring that I can pay attention to. And so math plus radio means, oh wow, I can use radio waves now to communicate with others remotely, right? And so I'm able to extend myself and begin interacting with remote parties, cell phones, right? All this digital communication stuff. So that's at a single level. I'll leave that there and open up for some questions. And then I would like to start talking about the self-perception and how that stuff goes, like what some of the things that play there. But I want to kind of take a pause for a minute, ask for some Q&A or thoughts, comments. Yeah.
When you talk about elements coming together to create a new consciousness that behaves differently after they come together, and your H2O was really good. Is it fair to say that the elements would be those molecules, whereas they separately puff as combustible things in a flame, and yet when they combine, they come in and might extinguish or turn to steam? Are you saying that is your phrasing of consciousness in that sense that the consciousness, as it were, of natural forces comes in to listen to these things differently? Like natural forces sees these things bound together, and the consciousness, as it were, the laws of those natural forces handles this new defined element differently than separately? Is that what the consciousness and stuff you're talking about? Or how do you bring consciousness into that example, if I may, if it fits at all?
For me, it's about what are the kinds of events that they interact with and how. So the fire thing is really about, does this, let's say, H2 molecule break apart and enter into a chemical reaction and form new molecules with some wood or right? There's some other things. Does it participate in a new dance? So is it open to being transformed in a particular way? Or is it resistant to that type of transformation? Maybe to such an extent that it actually stops other things from being transformed. And that, for me, is the shift. And so at one level, it's from the perspective of the H2 molecule, or let's say just H, from the perspective of a single H, hydrogen atom. What kind of dance is it doing, and what sort of relationships is it open to? Right?
And is that what you're referring to consciousness, as it were, of that molecule? It's what it's.
What is it sensitive to? What are the kinds of things that it might enter into and begin
So you think consciousness in a very broad and
very broad way. I'm not talking about like spirit.
I hear you. Right on.
I'm talking about sense.
Just double check.
And at one level, I'll kind of skip ahead a little bit to the Einstein's theory of relativity. I won't dive into it in full detail. But when people focus on time, a lot of the way that they frame it is events that you can count. Right? How do we know time occurred? Well, something changed. If nothing changed, inside of me or outside of me, a million years could go by and I wouldn't know. The game was on pause, right? But if I'm able to notice that, hey, things are different than they were just a moment ago, for me, all of a sudden, I'm able to observe that change. So they describe time as events that you can count. Well, what this concept of consciousness maps out is, from a particular layer of perspective, certain events may occur that I don't notice. And so from my perspective, it wasn't an event that I could count. And so no time occurred. From that layer of perspective. Now that doesn't mean nothing had happened. It just means from that layer of perspective, no event had occurred. You modify that and make it so that I am capable of noticing something and suddenly, oh my gosh, I'm now sensitive to these new signals. And I think what that ends up meaning is it makes it so that Einstein's theory of relativity often gets interpreted within Minkowski spacetime, so some kind of like three-dimensional space that also has time, but there's this space and then things are happening in that space. And it's about time in this spatial system, whereas what this would indicate is, oh no, it's not about that space, it's about a particular entity and its perspective. And from its perspective, did an event occur or not, right?
So,
and
question then.
Yes.
I am H molecule.
Yes.
Okay. And I am H molecule with H molecule consciousness. Relationship to the fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But I am also H molecule that happens to be in an H2O molecule. I'm still H molecule, but I have now two since you're thinking of it as more of a communication pattern, I have two consciousness streams at the same time.
Okay.
I have H consciousness, and I have the H2. Am I with you?
Yes.
So, are these two occurrences happening at the same time, or if now because I am H2 and I am the communication stream of H2, then is that consciousness pervade, like which is occurring?
So
or are they both occurring simultaneously?
They're both occurring simultaneously, but so you've got H2, and what it's already hooked up with an O. So there's H2, but because it's already hooked up with an O, right? From its perspective, it's not open to a new relationship. It's not poly. Okay? It's one only for me.
So right now, while I'm H2O,
So there's
I am
H2, there's H2, and then there's also H2O.
right, an H2O. So
But
now
that
we've got
H2
three streams of consciousness in a relative framework going on at the same time.
That's right. And the point that I'm making here is that you actually have, it's not infinite, but nearly infinite streams of consciousness or sensitivity, and that these are interacting. And what I talked about is how it emerges and persists. Well, the persist part is, hey, we have things that come together, right? And you'll have them come together and form a pattern, and they will be sensitive to the world in particular ways. And if the way in which they come together leads them to be sensitive to the world in a way that proves useful, they persist. And if it proves not so useful, they go away. And that doesn't mean they're good, but if there's a mutation that leads an organism to be sensitive to light, but it happens at the bottom of the ocean, where there is no light, let's say, just assume that there's no light. it doesn't gain an advantage. That doesn't mean it necessarily goes away, but other stuff might eat more cheaply. And so even though that capability arose, it may not persist. That same capability arising in a different context where, oh my gosh, this lets me go, hey, there's food over there, or there's sunlight over there. And that helps me use a photosynthetic process or whatever, right? That gives it an advantage that then leads it to have a more higher likelihood of persisting.
So
yes.
the reaction is what creates the persistence, not the actual emergence of the new consciousness streams. So it has to have its counterpart that gives it something in the world.
It's
that
operating in some larger
value.
context.
So the only way persistence happens is in the event of two things.
That's right.
In the communication between two things.
That's right.
In the reaction between two things.
And this is a little bit off to the side, but my belief is generally the way that persistence really works is not that something stays. It's that a pattern gets regenerated.
Say that again. The first half of that.
It's not that this light sensing being never dies. It's that it's capable of being regenerated. And that's really obvious in the biological sense, right? Hey, we have kids. Not that we live forever. We have kids, and so the pattern of a thing that has this kind of body and breathes air and eats food, that pattern keeps showing up. And there's some reasons for that, and it basically has to do with if you have a bunch of kids, there's more diversity than if it's just you. And so you're going to have more options on the table, and something's likely to get through. And if you are constantly competing with all of those, you actually reduce the likelihood that diversity persists. So there's some like recycling kind of stuff at that layer. But I think this also is the case in chemistry. What's that? One more
Nothing
time.
spiritual about that, or embedded in religion.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think this happens at a chemistry level too, though, right? You'll see in a particular context, hey, this feels stable, right? And then maybe you have additional pressure or temperature, or there's just that one other atom that hits, and all of a sudden the mass of the system becomes so great that fusion ignites. And all of a sudden, this is a different context, and it leads to a very different stability state. And so what are the things that persist? They're persisting in a context. But that context may change, and these are complex adaptive systems, right? And so their interactions lead to changes. There are time lags as you get to larger scales, so those changes take longer to occur, right? But once there's a flip, that flip may result in a very sudden shift in the stability state of that system. Okay, fluid boundaries of self and self-sovereign identity. So Christopher Allen's articulation of self-sovereign identity, which is the one that's kind of gotten a bunch of traction, I wrote a critique of that, and it was basically, a lot of this is anchored in this idea that the object that's being identified is a static thing. It's me and my body. There's a fair bit of this that's anchored in a body, which at one level assumes that this thing is a static reference, is that the right term? From birth to death, and it doesn't change. And one, my perception of self varies as a consequence of my interactions.
So what is the anchor?
What's that?
What is the anchor? What is the no anchor?
There is no absolute anchor. There's a way in which this treats this entity as if it's part of some absolute system. The point that I'm making is, no, this is actually a relativistic system. That from his perspective, he goes, yeah, that's Matt, right? But from some oxygen molecule's perspective, it might not notice me, or a gamma ray might not notice me at all. And so the observer is going to factor in some information. I'll give a slightly different example that's not great.
That makes a lot of sense what you're saying in like in absolute terms, but at the end of the day we are like living in the world of humans and we always have a Why can't we just have what we
So one thing I'll say is that identity is not only useful for humans, right? People are designing systems right now with self-sovereign identity as like a part of what they're taking into account. But they're developing architectures that they're then applying to lots of other things like collections of humans and Internet of Things devices and all of this other stuff, right? Which are actually compositions. Many of those make really visible the way in which there are compositions of entities that I may want to treat as a single thing. Like, hey, I'm handing off to these guys. I'm trusting this company. I don't care that they fired somebody last week. It's a company. I've been trusting them for a long time. They're okay. But they are changing shape on a constant basis, right? Well, that's the same with an individual. When we look at an individual, the way that we usually frame this is like, yes, Matt is a static thing, but then if Matt drinks, we're going to treat him differently. What I'm saying is that Matt drunk is actually a different thing, right? Because Matt drinking water, my cells interact in a way where my faculties are really driving whatever. Matt drinking a bottle of tequila, not so much. Our language for talking about this treats Matt as a static entity and goes, oh, but he's in a particular state. And what I'm saying is that's actually not, there may be another way of describing this that ends up being more accurate. And what it points to is there's a party in a context. And that when we're making a decision also in that context. Hey, I may trust you when you've made a promise in front of a whole bunch of other people that you care about what they think and you've got relationships, etc. So I'm like, yep, I can totally rely on this guy. But if you do something in secret off to the side and I don't know any other folks, same guy, different context, I may be unwilling to rely on them. And it's not that you're different, it's that the situation is different. Where this becomes useful or important on the self-sovereign ID part, I think actually has to do with key management, oddly enough. That I, as an individual, for various usability reasons, we don't want to anchor Matthew is this key for all time, right? We would like Matthew to have control over that key and not have others, but there could be a breach, might be a bug, whatever. So we also want to give Matthew mechanisms for going, well, I revoke that key, or I previously authorized those people to revoke that key, or my family members can revoke and replace that key. And so what you're really doing there is that individual is delegating part of their presentation of self to other individuals or institutions. And they're making decisions. You're never able to make the risk go away entirely. You're just making decisions about who do I want to hand some of these pieces off to? What are the ways that I'm wanting to shift my risk? Right? A common one today is email. Yes, we'll validate you through email, and then we'll have a two-factor authentication with your phone as well. And those are mechanisms that we're using for trying to minimize the likelihood of catastrophic failure. Right? I've lost my identity and it propagated across all areas of my life, or and I was never able to gain access to the bank account again, or those kinds of things. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution here. But there's no this is the way that we should tie identity. I think it's actually really appropriate that in different contexts, people are able to structure their risks in different ways. Often what's going to happen is there's going to be some best practices stuff, and they're going to go, yep, that looks good to me, this looks good to me, that looks good to me, and here's my backup. Right? But if we treat it as if it's a static thing and we try to dictate what those terms are based on a static reference, it doesn't map to how the world really works. Oftentimes I'm trying to get work done, and Alan Karp with the capability security folks, they make this point quite frequently. Hey, I'm not at the computer. Can you log in and perform this thing for me? And you need to be able to give them a way to do that without so that they get to impersonate you on an ongoing basis, right? And so we have to structure some of these things in ways that enable me to delegate others acting as me to perform tasks. I'm going to shut up for a second. Listen.
So like, so how do we like kind of like think about building a structure around it, which would like make this real? So like one example you gave is like delegation, and what we're talking about is that essentially there is no anchor, and we can like put an anchor, but then we're limiting how we are thinking about the identity. So like, how do we like represent something which is fluid in a way that will like work?
Sure. So one of the things I'll say is, as individuals, we will enter different contexts, and in those contexts, we will be willing to share particular pieces of information. We will be willing to bridge to particular other areas of our life to give access to information. And we'll be willing to share in particular ways because that context feels safe or it feels appropriate in that we feel like our risks are constrained there. This is actually sort of points out to membranes are really important. Social space membranes are really important. The Holochain approach, you had asked about, hey, what came first, your identity stuff or the Holochain stuff? And I said this is a sort of an iterative learning process. For us, the Holochain approach is, hey, I want to be part of a community that runs a particular way, and we're paying attention to certain signals. If we're a babysitting co-op, one of the signals we're paying attention to is, do they pick their kids up late? That doesn't mean they're evil. It just means if I have to be somewhere at 6 o'clock tonight, I probably shouldn't watch their kid tonight. Somebody else should watch their kid. And maybe it's they pick their kids up late, but they always pay $100 because whenever they pick them up late. Okay? It's not going to work for me. For somebody else, totally, I'll take that $100, right? But it enables a different level of sense making in that space. Different community, different social organism, paying attention to different signals. Fishing cooperative, they're paying attention, did you catch too many fish? Now, for them, picking kids up late is not relevant signal. It's not something they want to be sensitive to. It's not something they want to bear the overhead of keeping track of, because it's not relevant for helping them coordinate their activity in that space. The party that bridges across both of these is the entity who happens to have a foot in either. And if it becomes useful for me sharing my good fisherman status in the babysitting co-op for some reason, cool, I can do that. I can start to bridge that. But that management of identity, you need some extra tools for being able to do out-of-band revocation or regeneration or things like that. We end up creating our own Holochain app, which we've got like the very roughest version at present, but that's a distributed public key infrastructure that we're using for doing that revocation, or hey, I'm going to rely on this party over here. They're the ones who get to say that I showed up in person, I followed these processes, and they're claiming that I did the protocols that I said I was going to do, and then they go, yep, he's the same guy. This new key should replace the old one. And that layer of abstraction makes it so that the individual, what we're currently thinking of, is able to extend their self and treat others, give some authority or capacity, but be able to make decisions, exercise discretion about which things they're
So how is Holochain different than the indie sovereign model?
The DID model? I don't know that it's super different, except that we're not anchoring this stuff in blockchains. We're building it on a Holochain, which has a slightly different architecture. I think that we're going to be able to play well with. I think it's conceptually similar. I'm not certain, and again, I don't really know. I'm not certain how I feel about there being global reference. Like, I understand the value of a standard that says, I am so-and-so in this space. But, I'm not certain. Because some of those spaces may not be globally visible. It's part of what I'm saying. Because I may be wanting to share in mutually private shared spaces that I am this person over here, and if you happen to also be over there, then you can see me.
Do you see where the two might interlink with each other? So it's like in the public sphere,
Yeah.
I'm a part of Sovereign
Yeah.
and that network, but in addition to that, Holochain,
This particular app, let's say.
this runs on it, but it would accept the same verified claim structures.
Yeah, I can see. Yes, very much so.
Okay.
We're
And I may be using the wrong term, so.
no, but I think that sounds right. That somebody had said nice things about me here.
In the
I
public.
wanted in this one little
In the
app,
sovereign
in
environment.
the sovereign environment. I wanted to take that into this
put it into
space,
the Holochain.
make it visible to somebody here, so that they go, oh, yeah, you're safe to play, or we like you, or whatever,
Right.
and gain access to some opportunity. I do foresee those playing well together. I don't know if right now the way our stuff is
Well,
architected,
everybody's still.
we're figuring
architecting
that out. Yeah.
But I think that from what I heard in the afternoon session, that is their intent. Is that
Is to be able to get those to all.
to be able to, here, if you're in the sovereign network, it means these things and this framework and this
Yeah.
legal agreement has been established. That doesn't mean that somebody else can't either use blockchain or something else,
Yeah.
and that we communicate
That's right.
through
And again,
not
those-
yet created APIs.
Sure. But that's next year.
Oh, only next year. Okay.
Yeah.
So, a term that we use to introduce this is something like events-based organization, which means kind of like, okay, if you have like certain like patterns, and you can actually organize yourself around events, but there can also be aggregates of events too. But we also want to be mindful not to discriminate the newcomer. Doesn't have those fancy aggregates. But when I say event-based organization, I'm trying to move us away also from the concept of like identity as like something that should always be fixed. And in fact, it doesn't even need to be. You can have multiple functional identities, and you could appear differently in different contexts too.
Well, and for us in the Holochain context in particular, often we think one of the ways that a community will manage itself is not just its internal signaling stuff, but also at the membership layer. Who gets to come play, right? And you might have to satisfy some criteria before you enter that space, and others are even willing to interact with you, which is a little like. So we do think there are contexts where you go, yes, we don't want to play with strangers. We don't want to play with somebody who has no history, because this is a space where we're actually being really vulnerable with one another. And the fact that people are walking through the door with $1,000 in escrow or links to Sovereign and a bunch of history there makes it so that they've got lots of skin in the game too. So if they screw somebody over here, it has repercussions more broadly, which shifts the incentives, right? It makes it so that the game dynamics are different just because of that membrane management. And that enables people to have a different set of relationships in this space than they might otherwise. Other stuff. Yeah.
Well, this is. But the trust, the giving and the revoking of trust, is like a big binary, right? And this is a high uncertainty environment. I mean, you're doing things to and those things are great, but it's still a very uncertain environment. So the question is kind of like, did you consider the reject or have you just too far? Kind of a restrictive currency. I'm talking about a working but a kind of thing that you can do certain things that you earn a currency by doing certain trustworthy acts.
Sure.
In a variety of contexts. And that wouldn't be the answer. Like, it's not like I'm showing up a lot of cash and I'm saying they're trusting, but it would have a bearing on the trust decision.
So, Holochain comes out of the Meta Currency project, which is focused on how you do interoperable currency systems, with our definition of currency being a really loopy one that nobody else agrees with. Okay? So our definition of currency is not money, though money is a form of currency. Our definition of currency is currency. It's basically things that enable you to see flows of activity. Currencies aren't just money, they're implication currencies. They are nominal currencies of names, things like doctor, right? Or graduate of MIT. They are Rankable currencies. First place, gold medalist. Right? What's that? Titles. Yeah. They are currencies that have to do with the properties of systems. So, my heart rate is a currency. It's a distillation into a discrete signal, 58 beats per second, right, of the state of a system. And so from our perspective, currencies are about signals that distill information about a flow of activity so that members in a community can make decisions without having to deal with all the complexity of that flow. Like, I didn't have to sit alongside you for 4 years watching you go through school because somebody else gave you a diploma saying you had an engineering degree from MIT or whatever. So I didn't have to sit with you for 4 years to go, yeah, I'll give that guy a half-hour job interview. And I was willing to take that risk because of this distillation of a bunch of activity. So, yes?
Is it all activities, or are you doing anything with value?
Unpack that a little more. When you say value. Value as in values? Or values? Yeah, values. So the signals that a community pays attention to
Like honesty.
are how they make decisions about those values. And the signals that they're willing to share are how they communicate about those values. Now, how you architect those can influence whether it's shared, right? A lot of our existing reputation system stuff, Woofy, etc., are all public and one-dimensional.
Right.
Those are really bad designs for a reputation currency. When you think about how this stuff really works in the world, you often want privately communicated and usually positive information, right? Randy Farmer talks about, hey, if we design reputation systems primarily focused on the bad behavior we're trying to stop, those can be really awful systems that lead to very sort of toxic interactions. You can keep track of bad behavior, but only so long as it's able to ride on top of larger positive reputation that people are willingly passing around. So you usually want to figure out what's the good behavior that we want to foster, right? And so I go, man, she showed up on time. I'm giving her credentials showing she showed up on time all these different times. And when she shows up and is trying to get her kid watched, she goes, hey, check it. I know you guys are worried about somebody picking up their kid late tonight. I've never picked up a kid late. Here's 400 different instances where I picked up a kid on time. And you go, cool, right? Or somebody else synthesized that more discreetly. Hey, she's got a 99% uptime.
This isn't fair, but I want to raise the question.
Yes.
What about cultural norms? For example, I spent a lot of time with Native Americans.
Yeah.
If I was supposed to pick up my kid at 5 o'clock, but my grandmother got ill and needed immediate help, there's no question what I have to do.
That's
I
right.
have to go to my grandmother.
That's right.
Do you have those kind of gradations?
Um,
I'm just saying, how universal can this get?
yeah. So part of how we think about this stuff is
Wouldn't that be contextual in the group?
that's right.
Because
That's
it's
right.
not the actual entity, it's what I say I will accept. So
Okay.
in my cultural
Okay, so
acceptation,
there's a boundary in
it's
the
like
sense
I know
of
what my rules are.
Okay.
And part of why we designed Holochain the way we did was we wanted the individuals to be in control of the rules that they're running.
Okay.
We didn't
All
want
right,
to solve
so
that at a
helps.
network layer because that actually is really, for me, it's really important that we be able to adapt the cultural norms in response to lived experience. And my belief for the best way to do that is, yeah, you're not supposed to kill other people's sheep, but it was snowing, you were with your son, you were both about to freeze to death, you killed the sheep, you went inside of it,
Right.
stayed warm through the storm. And so what we as a community are going to do is we're going to try to figure out how to help make that guy whole.
Okay, all right.
Not going to put you in jail.
No, I
And so it's important
It's
to be able to
very
adapt those norms.
Okay.
And the other piece that I'll say is cultural norms are actually not a group-wide thing. They are held individually by each of the participants
No, I agree.
in brain and body. Right? Yeah. And those are the expectations. I see this and I go, oh, this is how that should go, or that's wrong, or whatever. And I have a visceral reaction. And if others share that, then we start talking about that as, oh, this is a shared cultural norm. But the fact that it's actually held individually, it's held holographically, is what enables us to go, wait a minute, I'm going to try this different thing.
Yeah.
And if that proves useful, others go, yeah, that seems fine, and we shift fluidly.
This paper that you were reading from,
Yeah.
is that something you've published or you're
It's-
willing to share?
I'm totally willing to share it. I haven't published it yet. I haven't even
Publish it.
finished the second half. I know.
Publish what you have.
Okay. I'll share it as part of this.
Okay.
I'll share it as part of this, and I'll say, hey, it's a work in progress, and I haven't done the second half that deals with the curation part. I will also share the video, though I don't know how the audio will come out. For us, the values stuff, we're interested in communities being able to track more than value. We want them to be able to keep track of values. And the other piece is bridging across communities becomes really important. Hey, within this community, we're paying attention to these things of value. This is the things that matter to us. In this other community, it's different. And for me, it's important that I be able to glean insights that were generated within this safe space over here, maybe use those in this other space. It actually makes the ecosystem much richer and more vibrant. Like, it enables us to thrive. I learned something in college that has all these weird norms about who gets credit and, in the academic world. And then I was able to take that into this business world where it's really just about profit and loss, right? And the fact that I was able to bridge that context, and somebody else was able to bridge a context of where they learned stuff about marketing, and somebody else was able to bridge a context where they learned stuff about engineering, is actually what makes this thing a vibrant thing in the first place. And it was through each of those individuals as bridges to other social spaces that it gained that diversity. And our take on it is, this is the model that we currently use, that humans and natural systems use for how to do data storage and social coordination, but it's not yet how digital applications work. And so we went, okay, if we can enable digital applications that function in that same way, then we can do the stuff that already works. I'll frame it a little bit. Then we gain the adaptive capacity benefits of this other model. That's really what's been driving us. For us, the highest form of we have this model of wealth. So we've got like tradable wealth, and then properties of systems, and so parts and products version of wealth, properties, nameable kind of wealth, rankable, and then evolutionary capacity. For us, that evolutionary capacity one's kind of like the highest one. It's the thing that actually enables that system to react to its surrounding environment and change. And so what were we aiming for in our designs was, how do we foster adaptive capacity?
And how are you applying that to artificial intelligence?
We are not, but I'm sure somebody else is going to come along and the one thing that I will say there, Judith, is my perspective on how artificial intelligence should get used is, I'm going to make use of a little AI agent thing, but it doesn't have observation of the entire system. It's got observation of the things that I have access to, right? It's capable of making sense of the world from the perspective, from this vantage point, and others are able to do the same thing. And what it should do is do some distillations, because I've delegated it, hey, make this complex stuff simple for me. Do some distillations that help me better navigate that space. But that's different from the all-knowing overlord looking over the entire system, because that very quickly to me feels like it's an oppressive thing that solves for this level of coherence, not these levels of coherence. And I think that something that solves for these levels of coherence actually far outcompetes the thing that's solving as a one-size-fits-all. Absolutely. It also feels like it's a much more human, friendly solution. The interacting one rather than the I can see everything. And so that's another reason why we're trying to create architectures that are the same stuff that this whole community's been working on for a long time around personal data, private data stores, and us being able to have control over this. Recognizing that control is often going to require us to delegate and hand off some other ways of being vulnerable. Cool. Thank you. Your point about trust. Not single currency. Like we're not envisioning a single currency. We think each community will come up with the forms of currency that help them steer. Help them minimize the kinds of risks that they face in their context. And they will come up with bad ones. And they will experience failures. And people go, wow, that sucked. And then they're going to change the code. Right? And they're going to copy somebody else who had a better experience. And sometimes people are going to take something that worked wonderfully well in this context, and they're going to copy and paste it into a very different context, and it's going to work very poorly, right? And again, lead to horrible. We see this as ideally a Cambrian explosion of social organisms. And we think there will be some evolutionary processes of people trying stuff, experiencing failures, experiencing successes, and learning and iterating. So that's the. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Good fortune with your stuff, man.
Thank you.
That was great. How can I learn more about this stuff? Is the website or
Yeah, so here, I'll give you a card. Our project is called Holochain, and it's open source. It's one way to think about it is an alternative to blockchains for doing distributed computing. Though we're not trying to do the absolute ordering of events. Right? We're not trying to get to a single perspective on the network and its history. Another way to think about it is, hey, cloud computing, right? But where the participants are the cloud. And you don't necessarily have to talk to any big data warehouse. So if you are in a disaster zone and you don't have connection to the outside world, but you have some little local mesh network, you could do Google Docs, you could do ride shares, you could do a currency system, or you could do some stuff locally that enable you to coordinate activity without having to rely on anybody else, and with that all running only on phones.
right? So like no single global source of truth, but like localized truths.
And well, localized truth, not only at the community level, it's basically localized at the community level. We would have a shared set of rules,
Right.
and then individuals are keeping track of their data and some of the other data in the system. And you've got a way of, when I do this, it goes out on the system and somebody receives it. They go, yep, that looks like it plays by the rules to me, and they order the Uber ride, right? They take the next steps that are required for pairing me with somebody. I'm asking for a ride, somebody else is offering a ride, and they help do the matchmaking. The system as a whole, all these various people's phones, collectively work together to connect the two of us, arrange a ride, and send us on our way. And so it's a distributed virtual machine or a distributed state machine.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. What are you working on?
Well, I'm
And I'll stop.
researching this space, like just getting into it. My background is in engineering, and yeah, I'm like